Hello, I'm Kimberly Henry, and this is Living the Good Life. In this series, we'll feature conversations around ways to embrace the goodness of life and take a big, juicy bite out of it. Food for the soul and the funny bone. Learn to give more time to yourself, become a better friend, lead an amazing life, and how to tell the best joke at the party. Living the good life can mean different things to different people. Whatever it is for you, I hope you'll find some inspiration here to live your most joyful, authentic life. Now, on to today's conversation. I am so excited for our guest today. For more than 30 years, he's been a storyteller using a variety of media platforms. And for 20 of those years, served as a television news producer, producing stories for Diane Sawyer at ABC News and for Charles Kuralt at CBS Sunday Morning, as well as stories for CNN, Public Television's Nightly Business Report, and even produced dozens of restaurant stories for the Food Network. So many different experiences. In his journey, he's worked with Paul McCartney, Steven Spielberg, and Muhammad Ali, as well as countless artists, musicians, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the personal development movement, like Tony Robbins and Jim Rohn. More recently, he's been active in public relations, kind of from the other side of the spectrum, writing press releases and securing media coverage for his clients on national television shows, magazines, and podcasts. With us today from his home in Ridgefield, Connecticut, where he lives with his family, please welcome our guest, Tom Martin. Tom?
Hi, Kimberly. How are you? It's great to see you.
Yeah, you too. So glad to be having this conversation with you. You've got so much to share.
Thank you. Thank you. No, it's an honor.
So we've known each other a couple of years now. It feels like so much longer. That's a good thing.
Exactly. Interminable. No, great. It's in a good way.
Right? And you run an incredible mastermind where we get to chat with all kinds of interesting people. And over the course of these 2 years, I've just learned so much about kind of your journey. And I feel like probably have only just got the tip of the iceberg. So I'm grateful that we get to share this conversation to dive a little deeper today. Do you mind?
No, I look forward to it. It's funny in my PR work, which is what I'm doing these days for the most part. I'm always telling my clients, don't talk about yourself. People don't want to care about you. That's like, what can you do for me? That's like the operative question. What can you do for me? So it feels a little unusual to be asked questions about myself, but I'm happy to have that conversation. I appreciate the compliment. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, you've got this concept, and I'll let you maybe share a little bit more about where you're taking that or where you see it going, but this concept of wisdom all around us. And I know that really applies to all of us, that we both have wisdom to share and we can glean so much from so many people. Where did you come up with that concept?
Well, I guess I've always been interested in people and stories. I mean, my dad, who retired, 10, 20 years ago, was a lifelong newspaper editor. He helped create USA Today 30 plus years ago, America's newspaper, and had, our family moved around, whether it was Miami, Florida, Rochester, New York, many other places, Baltimore, so that he could work as a newspaper editor, New York City also. And so I guess growing up in that environment, it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many stories here and there's so many interesting people around us. And I think we're all, I think every one of us is interested in our fellow human beings. Like, why did you choose that career path? Why do you do what you do? What do you think of, just in conversation, which is
I think
wonderful.
You're right. And sometimes it comes out as like, what were you thinking?
Right. Yeah, it's like, I would never do that. Yeah, exactly. But no, I think, both you and I believe, are members of, business networking groups. And so, when I've been asked to speak to my business networking group, I say one of the reasons I keep showing up every week is because I'm really fascinated by why somebody chose that path. And somebody like me, who I kind of reinvented myself a little bit, it's like, why? And many people have done that, these days, certainly. So, why did you choose to do that, and why did you make that shift and stuff like that? So I'm fascinated by that kind of thing, and so I've always been interested in people. I don't want to go like way off on a tangent, but during my college years, I thought I would become a lawyer because I was very active in the public speaking and debating program in high school in Florida. And so Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. had a really great program for students interested in those things. So that is why I chose to go to school there. And so all my buddies doing that kind of thing, and that's a natural path for people who become lawyers. It's like my son, Eric is 19. He's very argumentative. So he really wants to be a lawyer. He's got the right stuff to be a lawyer. But in my senior year of college, majoring in philosophy, by the way, because I'm very interested in people, the meaning of life, and all those kinds of things. I said, no, I don't want to be a lawyer. And so, because my dad, coming out of the newspaper business, had a friend. They worked together on the Detroit Free Press, which is where I was born many years ago, and they worked on the Night Beat together, covering crime stories and whatever else. And then his friend moved from newspapers into television, actually became president of CBS News at that time, around the time that Dan Rather was taking over from Walter Cronkite. If you remember, you're probably not old enough to remember those days.
I do remember.
But so he said, why don't you try working here at CBS News in Washington? So I did, and loved it. And again, this is going back quite a few years, but you might remember a movie called Broadcast News with Holly Hunter and William Hurt, and I forget the other actor, but at any rate, William Hurt and Holly Hunter. And so that was modeled on the newsroom where I got my start, covering politics and Washington news and stuff like that. And so it's been kind of a scattered career path. That's, if I have one defining characteristic, it's probably that I'm a little bit all over the place. I'm interested in a million different things, a million different people, but I love that. And so the news business seemed like a very good way to go there. And to leap ahead a few years into the news business, my work in the news business, I got to work for Charles Kuralt, who at that time, for many years, he'd been hosting a little segment on the CBS Evening News.
Right.
On the road, he and his cameraman and his sound man got in a mobile home, and they traveled all the corners of America, from Maine to, San Diego to Alaska and so on. And they we're doing stories about real people. They said everyone's doing stories about celebrities, and celebrities are interesting. And I have enjoyed some experiences like that, like you mentioned. But they were really focused on who are the real people? What are the real people doing, and why do they do what they do? And this included farmers and bricklayers and all kinds of things. And it's interesting. I was just up in Maine recently. It's not too far north of Connecticut, where I live right now. But I was thinking about Charles Kuralt and how he was fascinated by the regional differences of America. There's such great diversity, not just individuals, racially and all our characteristics, but regionally and accents and what food and all that kind of stuff. So I love all that. And so Charles Kuralt really inspired that idea in me that there is wisdom all around us. And these days we're so fast paced and focused on social media and, trying to cram a million things into every day. So it's harder and harder to pause and have a conversation. Again, I think that's something that I notice. It's different regionally. In the South, they have more conversations. In New York City, they're really go, go, go. But I find that if people are listening and getting to know one another, you can learn a lot. I'll just throw in one random example. Some years ago, again, when I was working for CBS News for that show with Charles Kuralt, I was working on a music story. I didn't travel that much internationally, but the story was in London. So flying back from London to New York City, the flight attendant came back to the back of the plane and said, "Oh, are you Mr. Martin? I see you're a frequent flyer. Would you like to move up to first class? We have a seat for you." So, yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. And within a couple of minutes, I realized they had seated me next to Jane Goodall, the chimp lady, who I'd watched many National Geographics about. So we had 6 hours to converse and get to know one another. And and again, like, she has some fame and, name recognition, all that, but just, you could be sitting next to somebody and it's amazing what you can learn, from a fellow human being. So that's sort of why I like that whole idea of wisdom all around us.
Tom, looking back to your pivotal moments, graduating from college and moving kind of into this different direction than you thought, was that a good choice? Or what would it have been like if you had not done this?
Well, I can honestly say I have no regrets about it. It wouldn't matter if I did, because that's the way, that's what happened. But I do remember within the first couple of years of being in the television news business there at CBS News in Washington, and I was fortunate to be right, I wouldn't say right at the top of the industry, but, they hired the best camera people and, took a lot. I wasn't a correspondent. I was just an assistant producer at that time, but, they hire the best correspondents in America, and, whether that's ABC, NBC, and so on.
Right, right.
But I got to work with people, the best in the industry. So I was not exactly starting out in, South Podunk, whatever. And I think I appreciated that. Like, wow, these people are really good. Can I rise to the occasion and do great work myself and deliver what they probably expect from me? And so I sort of stayed for the most part at that national level, whatever news organization I worked with. But at that time, with the first 2 or 3 years of working for CBS News in Washington, it was around the time where there were many layoffs in that business. I mean, the television news industry is well known for massive layoffs and being kind of unstable because huge shows can be canceled. I mean, I only did a little bit of work on the entertainment side with Dick Cavett. Some of your listeners may remember Dick Cavett, but in the paper, just for escapism, I'll sometimes read, the gossip columns or whatever. And so now there's something going on about Ellen DeGeneres, like, what's it really like working at the Ellen show? So it's like, you hear about whole staffs being just laid off, 300 people. So basically they're even on the news side, which I'd like to think was more stable and serious rather than the entertainment side. I'd like to think there was job stability, but there really wasn't. So sometimes I would think, well, maybe I should have done that law thing. But again, but again, during my college years, I worked for a few months for 2 lawyers. They were doing like tobacco litigation, and they were working on the same. Not only did I sort of disagree with the people that were paying them, which is none of my business really, but they were working on the same case for year after year after year. And I think just by the same token that I'm interested in a million different things, it's probably hard for me to sit still and work on the same project for years, So I'm very happy with the path that I chose. I've met a lot of interesting people, and it's been an opportunity to be creative and all that kind of thing. So I'm very happy with the path that I chose.
I think there's a lesson in that, in that things may not always go the way you lay them out. And sometimes there's maybe a fork in the road, and following your intuition, following your gut, following your passion can create an interesting life.
Exactly. No, I definitely believe that. It's interesting, you mentioned our mastermind group, which I really love. And if any listeners are interested in that, I hope they'll contact me and learn more about it, because I love bringing new people into the group. So on a call that we had yesterday, we had a young man, I guess probably the youngest member of our group. I think he's 22 years old. You probably know our friend Marcus from Germany. And so he was saying, I know that I need to choose what's important in my life and get on that path. It's like, yeah, that's a lot of pressure. I mean, I give him more credit. I don't know that I was thinking like that exactly when I was 22 years old, but I said, hey, Marcus, I think you need to look within and see what's right for you, because I think for myself, I spent many years looking for outside validation. Like, am I on the right path? What do you think? Do you think I'm on the right? And like, why did I do that? I don't know if that's just kind of an insight that comes to all of us as we get older, but I wish I had had that confidence earlier on. So anyway, when you asked that question, that's what came to mind.
Well, that's an interesting point. I remember, so I think I'm not that much younger than you are, Tom. I think we come from a similar era. And I remember that not too long ago, there was a correct path. You graduate high school, you go to college, you get a good job, you stay there for 20 years or 30 years, you retire and garden. That was kind of the correct path. And I give so much credit to young people today that are not necessarily buying into that, mostly because they can't. There's just not that stability anymore in our economy as far as how businesses are run. As you said, there's tons of layoffs. Even in journalism, that the face of journalism is changing drastically. I remember when seats would change at ABC, at Good Morning America or to the Today Show, those stalwart shows that we had. Seats would change and people would just be up in arms because their favorite anchor moved to another desk, because that's all we had. We only had, those 3 networks. And now we have so much noise, so much to choose from. It's changing so quickly. So our young people are in a vastly different place than we were.
Exactly. No, exactly. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I hadn't really thought about it, the news business in that way, but you're definitely correct about that. And over the years, whether it's on in my news work or on my PR work, I've handled a number of different projects relating to children and self-esteem and bullying. And I was just on a
Mm.
call yesterday with I'm part of an organization called the Children's Health Fund. That's a nonprofit to bring medical care to children in poverty. And I really believe that every one of us, however young a person may be, 3 or 4 years old, even, there's some great potential within them. And we really need to take care of one another and make sure that we each have the opportunity to blossom and, for our talent to emerge and for us to feel some support, and that kind of thing. So I definitely agree with you about younger people these days that there's a lot of pressure. And I mean, it's like my son, up until a few weeks ago, we thought he would be going back down to Washington, D.C., because
Hmm.
he was going to start his second year of college there. And they thought, okay, well, so many schools are handling things differently, state by state, obviously. And they
Hmm.
said, no, we're just going to stick to online learning this semester. So we felt a little more relieved, I guess, But I'm thinking it must really be hard for people who are 19 years old. And my daughter is 22 years old. She had an online graduation back in May.
Hmm.
And so she's just starting her first job. She was worried that, like, around that time, she didn't have her first job lined up. Like, in this current situation environment, how am I going to find a job? That came together. So now, for I hope my family's not listening to this. For better or worse, we're all at home together. I've been doing my work from a home office for years now. Like, it's kind of nice. They all leave. It's me and the dog. But but I give young people credit because there's a lot of pressure right now, but there is also a lot of freedom and opportunity, like you said. So.
Yeah, yeah, it's just a fascinating time to be alive. So you worked with you mentioned your time with Charles Kuralt, and that seems like a time that you really enjoyed. But looking back over maybe the body of work and the experiences and stories that you've had a chance to work on, is there something that jumps out at you as a favorite?
Well, it's hard to isolate one single experience, but there have been a few, and it's funny sometimes. I mean, and this may be an obvious observation. Again, we probably all feel like this at different points in our lives. Those special moments, the birth of a child, and getting married. It's like, this is a special moment. This is a
Right.
special day. But I do remember a time in the 1980s when I had just finished producing interviews for several years for Charlie Rose at CBS News. He used to have a show on in the middle of the night called Night Watch. This
Hmm.
was before there were so many channels, 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. We'd often tape interviews during the day. They would air that night, that kind of thing. And so I
Hmm.
just moved from that show to, like I said, I spent a little time on the entertainment side of things, working with Dick Cavett, who's similar to Johnny Carson, basically of that era. They were close friends and that kind of thing. Stand and monologue to open the show, and then people would sit down. I love the fact that Dick had interviews with John Lennon and Janis Joplin and Norman Mailer and Salvador Dali and people like that. It's amazing. And so we were
Hmm.
both interested in magic tricks. And so when he would come in to be interviewed by Charlie Rose when I was working there, he said, hey, Dick, we have the same magic teacher, a little old Italian man, and the Broadway district of New York City, Tony Slidini, with his broken accent, but he could do miracles with cards and coins. It's like, wow, this is amazing. There's some people are not interested in magic, but I loved it as a kid and as a teenager. So we had that in common, and Dick Cavett grew up with that also. I think Johnny Carson was also an amateur magician. But so they gave me a call when I was working on Dick Cavett's staff in New York City, and they said, "Hey, Tom, Miles Davis finally responded to your interview request and said he wants you to show up at his apartment tomorrow to talk him into being on your show." And I said, "Well, I've moved from the Charlie Rose show to the Dick Cavett show." It's like, yeah. He's just honoring your request and wants to talk to you about it. And it was kind of intimidating because I enjoy jazz, but I don't necessarily know that much about it. And he was like one of the greatest jazz legends of all time. Sort, you know, no one quite like him even. It's more like he was like the Pablo Picasso of jazz.
Uh-huh.
And so I'd also heard that he wasn't that crazy about white people like myself. It's like, oh, this is going to be a little, and he was kind of a moody, difficult. He was a genius, total genius. It's like,
Right.
what a great opportunity. So I ended up spending the day with him at his apartment, and I brought my little tape recorder. I interviewed him, and I remember him talking about how much he loved some current music at that time by Prince and Michael Jackson.
Oh,
And there are probably people
yeah.
from the 50s and 60s who thought, oh my God, Miles is a jazz innovator, a genius. I can't believe he likes Michael Jackson. That was pop music stuff, But it's like, it's fascinating. And so I did talk him into being on the show. My executive producer said, will you tell that Miles guy, if he doesn't put his band together and play live on our show, we don't want him. And I
Oh,
thought, he rarely does an interview. He's kind of a reclusive guy. It would be a great coup to get an interview with Miles Davis. And you want me, the young white guy, to tell Miles, you see here, you better put your band. It's like, well, I said, if you don't mind, Mr. Davis, this is what my boss mentioned. He said, well, it's okay. If Dick does me a couple of magic tricks for me, we'll do it. And I said, cool, that's great. And so I remember I did a magic trick or two for Miles Davis, and it
oh,
was
fun.
and we were recording the show at Rockefeller Center, the same studio that Saturday Night Live has used for many decades. And Paul Schaefer was standing next to me there for the sound check. Like, wow, Miles Davis. So that was a great
Oh,
great
wow.
memory.
So
And then
tell us, how did that
yeah.
go, though? I mean, you show up at his apartment, and was he welcoming?
Fortunately, yes. I guess, I mean, that it could have gone. It could have gone either way, I think. But I've, what I've learned. One thing that I've learned about working with a number of celebrities over the years. Again, it's kind of an obvious point, is that in many ways they are just like us.
Right.
In other ways, they're not, in the sense that total strangers are constantly approaching them on the street and wanting a little of their time, and that must be very hard. I really give credit to people who are big celebrities, and they just tolerate that. They're appreciative. Like I wouldn't have this level of fame and income and freedom if it wasn't for you. So I'm really appreciative. But other people won't they just leave me alone? But for the most part, they're just like us. I think that all of us like to be appreciated. I mentioned
Sure.
earlier about that young man talking about, are you looking for validation outside yourself? I think to some degree we like to be appreciated and hear that, what we're interested in is interesting to other people and that our ideas matter. You mentioned Tony Robbins. I've done a lot of work with Tony Robbins over the years. And sometimes I think, think of different quotes, that I've learned from him over the years. And one, in his opinion, he says, we're all concerned about two things, am I enough and will I be loved? And I don't know that we're all literally walking around thinking those questions, but I think people like to be appreciated. Right. And so when I have done my news stories, or when I'm working with a PR client, or even connecting with people in our mastermind group, I like to be supportive. Like, I might not have chosen to do what they're doing, but it's like, that is interesting, and I'm excited for you. I'm happy for you. I think maybe there's a heightened awareness about that right now, in 2020, because we've all been so busy with our lives and what we're focused on. But I think there's a little more thought now, maybe a lot more thought about supporting one another and appreciating one another. And that's a good thing.
And I think this global community that we're developing, because because social media exists, but two, because we have kind of been forced to use social media in order to have connection in this time of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
It's allowing us to actually have access to maybe a broader swath of people that we may not have otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. It's I hadn't really thought about this before, actually, but it might be.
I'm just bringing you all kinds of new insight.
That's why I love conversation. We talk about what's a good life. Are you living a good life? I love, the top of the list for me is conversation and exchanging ideas. That means it's a good life as far as I'm concerned, So, but I was thinking, I talked to a lot of people who seem to be intimidated by the news media. I think when they use that term, it's a little too organized. As I remember, before Charles Kuralt passed away, some 20 years ago now, he was interviewed like, isn't it true that there's a conspiracy in the news media? He said, that's ridiculous. It's like, let me just tell you, the news media is so disorganized, and so many people with so many different views and experiences, and so many people, trying to make a name for themselves. Not that they're, necessarily distorting things, although I know some do. But it's like to say there's a vast conspiracy is just giving it way too much credit. So what I was going to say about people awareness of other people on the other side of the world and so on, it's like people who thought, oh, I could never get my story in the news media, or why would they even be interested in a person like me? And that's almost like saying, I'm not sure that I matter. I'm another motivational speaker and author I really like is Brendan Burchard. And I think he says, there's certain key questions we'll ask at the end of our life. Did I love? Do I matter? It's like terrible to think that you don't matter. And I'm sure there are, many people who feel that they don't matter, or children. And I think we all have a responsibility to reassure them and let them know they do matter. But that opportunity to connect with people internationally, like you just said, I think is similar to like, well, maybe I don't need to connect with people internationally. It's like, but you have your views matter, and there's people out there who would appreciate hearing from you. So, and it's a very fulfilling experience, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's something that I struggled with myself, probably 5 or 10 years ago in the wellness and the health and wellness. I'm a personal trainer, yoga teacher, and also obviously a broadcaster. And so I was being kind of guided by some external sources to have a wider platform, do podcasting, do shows, do things. And I kept telling myself, there's so much of that out there already. There's already, guru personal trainers and yoga teachers and mindfulness practitioners. And I thought that it seemed redundant for me to go out there. And then what I learned over the course of time was I'm going to reach somebody differently than all of those other people. And just as people have reached me where someone else couldn't. I think to your point, we all have a different way of connecting with each other.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's so important. I think about that point, that idea often, in that, sort of, I wouldn't say growing up in the Tony Robbins environment, but spent, 20 years sort of focusing on that, and have a lot of friends from that community. And, you and I met through another great coach and author, Lewis Howes, great podcaster. So there are all these communities that are focused on, personal development and so on. So I'm sure if I could make a list, I'm sure I know dozens of life coaches. It's like, excuse me, doesn't the world have enough life coaches? And again, it's like, okay, you're only 22 years old and you're a life coach. How does that work exactly? But the fact is, like, I totally agree with what you just said, just that people are so different. There's such a diversity of opinion. It's like, wow. And I guess I never really read those classic Dale Carnegie books, like people build relationships with the people they know, like, and trust. It's like, that person's like me. It's like, yeah, great.
Yeah, there is somebody who needs a 22-year-old life coach.
That's right. Exactly. I'm not putting it down, believe me. So, but I agree with what you just said. Yeah.
There's so many different places I want to take this conversation with you, Tom. We could talk all day. I'm dying to know about that photo that I've seen of you and Rod Stewart. How did that happen? And what was that experience like?
Well, it's funny. There's a as you know from your work in the news business, there are times when it's sort of a grind, and you're working hard, and you have a project you're working on, and it's not like I don't think they ever ask like, why am I doing this or anything, but there are times when it's just hard work and long hours. But for me, there's also those moments when, like, it lights up the fan in me. I mean, I remember, I think it was 1970 when Maggie May was number one on the charts, And so I think I went to my first Rod Stewart concert in 1977 when I was a freshman in college, way back when. And so that had always been one of my favorites, rock stars and so on. Although it's funny when, I'll finish this story in a second, but when I first went to work for Good Morning America in 2001, my boss, in charge of like the 12 different producers on the show, said, Tom, we have a great surprise for you. Who's your favorite rock star? And I said, Mick Jagger. And she said, no, that's not the right answer. Your favorite rock star is Paul McCartney. We have a project for you with Paul McCartney. So it's like, yes, that's forget Mick Jagger, you know.
Right up there.
Exactly. But I'd been a Rod Stewart fan for many years, and so I actually was filming a restaurant review story. You know, you mentioned I'd done some work for the Food Network for a number of years doing restaurant stories, and I happened to be in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. So I saw walking down the hall his distinctive hairstyle. It's like, oh my God, there are times when I think I see a celebrity on the street or something. It's like, I really should leave them alone. They don't need to be bothered all the time. I've told my family how some years ago I saw Steven Tyler of Aerosmith walk into a sandwich shop, and I thought I should leave him alone. It's like, no, I really have to say something. So I was like, well, what can I say to him that's not just, oh, I love your work. You know, when Dick Cavett about a year ago came to my house, I hadn't seen him in 30 years, but I've worked hard to reconnect. So we worked together. We loved magic together. How can we reconnect? And so his assistant said, yeah, Dick would love to see you again. Pick him up at his house and such and such. And I told him, I said, I feel like that. I think it's Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live sitting next to Paul. Paul, remember when you were with those other three guys? That was so cool. It's like, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I just said. So when I'm with a celebrity, when I saw Steven Tyler walk into the sandwich shop in New York, I thought, okay, well, I just have to say something. And so I'm looking, well, what, as a real conversation, do we know anybody in common? Do we have anything in common? And I'd actually met him years earlier, but he would certainly never remember that. I said, hey, Stephen, Peter Max is a friend of mine. Peter Max, the painter, the artist who I've known for years. And I think Steven Tyler said, I'm happy for you, man. I'm really just trying to use the men's room. So there's it's like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. But with Rod Stewart, we did have a conversation about, our children, because one of his recent concert things, he'd shown some home movies of his children and so on. I happen to know that he's interested in miniature trains, believe it or not, a rock star who spends many hours designing the little buildings and the little train tracks. And so we had other things to talk about, and I'd met him a couple other times. When I was working for Good Morning America, I didn't always come in at 5 a.m. the way Diane Sawyer did. More, my side was like working late the previous night till 2 or 3 a.m. But when I heard that Rod Stewart was coming in, I think 2 different times, maybe 3, I said, I want to be there. I want to say hello. And so there's that fan side of me that's very much aware, like I mentioned, the Miles Davis experience. Like I know This is a special day. I'm going to look back on this. Like, how can I really, make the most of this moment? But it's fun. It's fun to do that, I must admit.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Rod Stewart, one of my favorites. Steven Tyler, one of my favorites. I am in awe of you, Tom.
Well, it was just fun, but I do look for those moments. Like, is there anything I can possibly say that's like a meaningful bit of conversation?
Right.
So, but other times I think they just appreciate, like, your work has meant a lot to me for decades. Who would not want to hear that? But it is interesting that even and I did notice that with Paul McCartney, that he was very much a real person. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised. But it's more like his circle of handlers, because, before he arrived at the studio that day, I was thinking, well, two Beatles have been killed. I mean, John Lennon was basically assassinated. And I think George Harrison actually had somebody broke into his house in England and stabbed him. It's like, my God, it must be hard being a Beatle, like one of the most famous people on earth. So, but he himself was just very, very nice. And I remember a few years later reading a story, like somebody wrote a little Huffington Post article, said, well, I happen to be, maybe it was in New York City, and I saw a sedan or limo pull over near a homeless man, and Paul McCartney got out, and he went over and he had like a 10-minute conversation with this guy and gave him some money. So it was very nice to hear that it's not like, hey, I'm a celebrity, to hell with the rest of you, I've made my money. And it's nice we have that common humanity. So I would definitely encourage people, if there is also what I say often when I'm speaking to groups is you might be surprised how rarely your favorite celebrity, or like, Walter Cronkite or somebody like that in the old days, gets a letter saying you've influenced my career and I'm so grateful for this reason. And it's like they really like that. And it is possible to meet these people and have a real conversation with them. So
wow, what a journey you've been on. You're now kind of flipping onto the other side. So you're in the place where you were booking these artists and working with these artists and these talents. And now you're in a place of kind of pitching opportunities to the media.
Mm-hmm.
How does that shift feel?
It felt very natural. It feels pretty natural, I would say. I know that around the time that I made that decision, now that's going back about 15 years. But I felt, some of my friends who are journalists that said, I can't believe, you're for hire. That's like being a criminal attorney. Like, I'll defend murderers. What the hell? It's like, no, I'm not just going to take anybody's money and try to get them fame or whatever. I came up with a tagline for my PR business: connect, communicate, change the world. And I know that sounds kind of idealistic, but I do love working on stories where they're educating people or they're introducing something new. I mean, for example, one PR project I'm working on right now is about online music education. So many people are focusing on learning online right now, whatever age they may be. And so a young music professor at the Berklee College of Music in Boston had this idea, like masterclass, that has, the celebrity classes and everything. And so I'm helping him get attention for this creation. People will learn. I'm also in my role as connector. I mean, in my PR work, I was very shy as a kid, I would say. So maybe journalism and PR work is a chance for me to step out of that mode. And so I've started doing some work as a connector with different technology investment opportunities. One project I'm working on is really called the reinvention of the internet. Some scientists and engineers have come up with a way to prevent hacking and prevent malware and so on. And another group I'm working with is raising millions of dollars to fund medical research that the pharmaceutical companies aren't supporting. It feels really good to use my love of bringing people together and, telling a story, how do we convey this in a really concise way that would engage people's attention and that kind of thing to hopefully do good on the planet.
What do you tell someone who has a great story, a great idea, something they feel would contribute to the world, or maybe they just want to have their 15 minutes of fame,
Sure.
right? How do people find their way into media?
Sure. Well, I mean, if anybody's listening to this conversation, I'd be happy to talk with them one-on-one because I love that side of what I do. But to answer the question, I would say that, again, put the spot, like I said, sort of the start of our conversation, it feels a little odd to be talking about myself because I'm always telling my PR clients, don't talk about yourself, talk about the other people. And,
well, I asked.
So I guess I have to answer, just in courtesy, I will answer your question. No, when I worked at Good Morning America, we had a great executive producer, Shelley Ross, and she said, okay, we had an afternoon meeting for the 2 hours of the show, for the next day. And that was the time we'd also bring up story ideas. And she said, for every one of those 16 segments on the show tomorrow, the audience is sitting there asking one question, consciously or subconsciously, what's in it for me? My time is precious. Mm-hmm. Why does this fit into my life? How is it relevant? And so if somebody listening to this interview is interested in sharing their story with a wider audience, whether that's, your own small town or on a national level or whatever the case may be, I think you have to, don't think about, the awards that you've won and, the fact that, well, our business is 100 years old. It's like, those are interesting things. And there's a place for stories like that. But it's more like, how do you fit into the lives? Who is your, sort of marketing 101? Who's your ideal client or the people you want to communicate with, and what do you have of value? Say, what could you offer in a 5-minute interview or 4-minute interview that might make a difference in their lives? I mean, maybe I'm working with one author, older gentleman who's got a new book on parenting, and his ideas are a little different from what most people have heard about parenting. So I said, well, that, with families at home, I mean, my kids are older, they're no longer kids, I guess, but there are many families with young children at home, and it's a challenging time, and people are getting on one another's nerves a little bit, or we want to ease their worries. So it's like, is there information you as a parenting expert could share in a 4 or 5 minute interview and do it for free so that if the people walk away and they never hear of you again, never connect with you, you've added something to their lives, and they'll say, wow, I'm really glad that I heard that. That's really what you want to do. And, like we were talking a minute ago about, there are 2 million life coaches on the planet, but they all have an expertise in something. Maybe they're really good at a certain sport. or nutrition or some idea, something that's resonated in their own lives that they could share with others. And again, that goes back to that wisdom all around us idea. It's like, is there something in your life that other people could benefit from if they only knew it? And don't put a price on it or attach strings like, buy my book. A lot of times I do work with authors, but I encourage them to give their information away, because then people say, wow, that really helps my life. And I'm really grateful to that person. And, oh, they have a book. I think I want to buy that book. And you shouldn't do it so that you'll sell the book. I know that's, usually the way it's like, I really want to sell my book. But usually people that focus on a certain body of knowledge do it because they want to help others, and I encourage them to do that. So, and then, it's sort of a matter of, writing a press release or pitch and find out, who are the people. If you're trying to pitch your local television station, well, who are the people there? You can find that on their website. You can find information like that on LinkedIn and Twitter. And the way that I do my PR work is sort of casting a wide net. I mean, I do have many, many relationships. So I'm grateful, like people remember, Tom, I've known you for 20 years and you sent me a really great story last month. And what are you working on now? It doesn't necessarily mean they'll say yes to it. That's out of my control, to be honest. But at least they'll get some attention. And just like I said, these celebrities like hearing a compliment. If you're a realtor in a certain city and you cover read certain journalists or are aware of their work because they cover real estate, you could contact them on Twitter or email or LinkedIn and say, hey, I really like the story that you did last week on such and such a topic. And the next time you do that, you might want to include this idea or that idea, or if you'd ever like to discuss it, meet for coffee or virtual coffee. I'd love to do it. So you're not saying, hey, do a story about me. So you're building that relationship,
Right. That's a great idea. Have you ever had any crazy pitches that either one of your clients came up with?
Well, I do remember working at CBS Sunday Morning, and somebody sent in a letter, and they said, I've created a life-size sculpture of Charles Kuralt made of butter, and we'd like to have that on the air. And I thought, I don't know. It's like I respect your artistic, endeavors, but I don't think we'll be doing that, And
funny.
it's
Why would you turn that down?
We should have done it. They're probably the best ratings. I know we have a president who talks a lot about ratings. If we did everything for ratings, it's like, okay. But anyway, so no, and
it would have been a whole different world.
And there was another story. Again, when I was working for CBS Sunday Morning, a young man in Illinois said, well, as I'm sure Illinois has all these jagged borders. It's not like Kansas, But so he said, well, I hung the shape of Illinois at different angles, and I found what I believe is the geocenter of the state of Illinois in this tiny little farming town. And I contacted them and I told them, hey, did you know that you are the geocenter of the state of Illinois? I think we should build a little monument and have like a festival announcing that we are the geocenter of the state of Illinois. And it's like, well, that's kind of a crazy idea, but it's innovative and it's interesting. And we ended up covering the story. It's like, imagine what people will celebrate, So it's kind of fun. So
that's funny. And I think that guy with the butter statue is probably feeling really bad about that.
I hope he's not listening. I know. Don't tell him where I live. Yeah.
Right? So much fun. Well, looking back, I mean, this has been a great conversation. And I, like I said earlier, I think we could go on all day long. I want to know, looking forward, Tom, what is your most extravagant wish for the direction of the future? And that can be personally or on a more global. You just, whatever. What comes to mind?
Well, I think there are a lot of challenges that we all face in the world right now. And I think it's a natural desire to want to make the world a better place. It's kind of a broad phrase, I know. But, I think there's room for health research that could make a difference in the lives of millions of people. I think there's room for progress in terms of racial harmony and appreciation for one another. And I think we do each play a role in making a difference. Maybe we don't have to take all of these big areas and like, well, I'm going to make a difference in all these big areas. Like I said, I was on a call. I'm on the advisory board of the Children's Health Fund with Jane Pauley as the head of our advisory board. And currently, I did a story about them 30 years ago for CBS Sunday Morning, and now they are helping 100,000 children in poverty. It's even more challenging, but if a child has asthma or even needs a pair of glasses, they're not going to be able to learn as effectively as if they had those things taken care of. So there's so many ways that we can make a difference. And I remember one guy I knew who was a futurist, sort of like Alvin Toffler and Faith Popcorn and people like that, if you remember those trend analysts. My friend Watt Swacker, very eccentric, fun guy here in Connecticut, passed away a couple years ago. But he said, personally, I'll just come right out and say I'm not a Donald Trump fan. Sorry, other people, but I'm not. And so I said, so Watts, do you think this guy Donald Trump could really get elected? And he said, well, it's possible, but I want you to remember something, is that when sort of like the pendulum is pushed to an extreme, sort of like Tony Robbins says, well, when do people change? If you've been smoking 2 packs of cigarettes for 20 years, when do you change? You change when you must change. So there's certainly things going on in the world right now in terms of health, in terms of racial justice, in terms of opportunity for all people, that like things must change. So it's actually a good thing because people are waking up. And, I think Barack Obama said that in some of these marches, I'd rather see marches rather than riots and violence or anything like that, obviously. But Barack Obama said, I noticed, and I think the late John Lewis also said, I noticed there's great diversity in the people who are marching and speaking up. It used to be just the Black community. And so it's nice that people are like, yeah, we really need to take care of some things here. So, that's just sort of how I look at it.
Just the sense, a lot of people call it being woke or awake. Just understanding your place in all of this, I think, is maybe what you're alluding to, and that sense of responsibility to make the change, whatever that is.
Yeah, no, well said. Definitely.
Yeah, fascinating. Tom, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
My pleasure. I appreciate being asked. Thank you.
Absolutely. And if folks want to reach out to you, I know you have your website, tommartinmedia.com, or email tom@tommartinmedia.com. Anything else you want to add?
No, I just would love to hear from people. If anybody out there is feeling perhaps a little frustrated or, they've been working on a project, maybe if they've written a book or they're working on a project they really wish the world was more aware of. Other than butter sculpture, I'm pretty much open to anything. And so if they want to, I
don't know what your problem is with butter.
I know. Yeah. So they can feel free to contact me, because that's one of my favorite things to do, is think of strategies and ideas and connections that, might help them. So, yeah. And then again, be aware that we have a great mastermind group on Zoom. I host three calls a week, and we have about 25 people in the community right now, including yourself. And I really enjoy that. And it's a great place to exchange ideas and support one another. So if they're interested in that, they can contact me about that too.
Excellent. All right. Well, Tom Martin, it has been a pleasure. And we look forward to chatting with you again sometime in the near future.
Thanks, Kimberly. I really loved it. Good luck. And thanks for including me in your great series. I really appreciate it.
Be sure to check the show notes for links mentioned in this episode, and join us in the Living the Good Life Facebook community for previews of each episode, the opportunity to pose questions directly to our guests, bonus content, and a community of people committed to living their best life and sharing the journey. Thanks for listening. Let us know what value you received from this episode and what you'd like us to explore in the future in the comments. And please take a moment to drop us a like or some stars. I'm Kimberly Henry. Let's get out there and live the good life.